The sky hung heavy over the graveyard, thick clouds swallowing the sunlight and painting the world in shades of gray. A chill wind whispered through the rows of gravestones, carrying the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Lady Alara sat alone, her black cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, as if trying to hold back both the cold and the grief that gnawed at her heart. Around her, distant voices murmured prayers and condolences, but they felt hollow. She did not hear them. She did not want to. Her mother's casket rested at the center of the mourners, polished oak glinting faintly under the dim sky. The ornate carvings on its surface seemed almost cruel in their beauty, a reminder of the life she had lost and the secrets her mother had carried until the very end. Ilara's fingers traced the edge of her gloves, gripping them until her knuckles turned white. Her mind was a storm of sorrow, anger, and confusion. Her mother had been strong, wise, and yet she had died under mysterious circumstances. Rumors whispered of an ancient curse haunting their family, a darkness her mother had fought her entire life. And now, with the woman gone, Ilara felt small and unprotected in a world that had always seemed cruel. The silence around her was broken by the sound of boots against the wet ground. At first, she ignored it, thinking it another mourner passing by. But the steps were deliberate, confident, and they carried a weight that made the hair on her arms stand on end. She looked up, slowly. A figure emerged from the shadows of the tall, black cypress trees. He was tall, his presence commanding attention even without words. His coat was dark, almost blending into the stormy sky, and a hood partially shaded his face. But it was his eyes that caught her piercing, gray like steel. And yet, strangely, they seemed to see everything. They were not just looking at her. They were studying her, measuring her, understanding the depths of her sorrow in a way no one else had. The people around the graveyard noticed him too, whispering under their breath. "Kaelin," they said, "the alpha of the northern clans. Feared, cruel, a man whose name was spoken with reverence and fear alike." Tales of his ruthlessness had traveled even to the noble houses of Valandral. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of her mother's funeral, watching her. Ilara felt a strange shiver run through her. There was something in the way he moved, precise, controlled, dangerous, and yet there was also an undeniable strength. She wanted to turn away, to retreat into her grief and hide. But a part of her was drawn to him, a part that whispered she could not ignore this man. Not now, not ever. He approached, his boots crunching against the wet leaves, and stopped just a few feet away. He did not bow, he did not speak, but there was an intensity in his gaze that made her heart race. Finally, he spoke. His voice was low, calm, but carried an edge that made it impossible to ignore. "Lady Ilara," he said, "you should not be here alone." She blinked, startled. His words were simple, but in them, there was a promise of protection, an unspoken warning that danger lingered closer than she realized. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came. "Your grief is not yours alone to bear," he continued, stepping closer. Not anymore. The mourners around them shifted uneasily, some glancing at him with fear, others with curiosity. But Ilara's focus remained solely on Kaelin. There was something magnetic about him, something dangerous, and yet comforting. Her hands trembled, and for a moment she wondered if she should run. She had always been careful, cautious, never trusting strangers. And yet, she felt a strange pull toward him, as if fate itself had brought him here. Kaelin extended his hand, a gesture that was both commanding and strangely gentle. Ilara hesitated. Her pride told her to refuse, to retreat into her sorrow and face the world alone. But the ache in her chest, the raw emptiness that had settled there since her mother's passing, was too heavy to carry alone. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, steady, and somehow reassuring. like an anchor in a storm. As they walked through the graveyard, the wind tugged at her cloak, and the scent of wet earth and old stone filled her senses. Kaelin's presence was overwhelming, almost suffocating, yet it also gave her a strange sense of safety. She wanted to ask him why he had come, why he had chosen to be here, but the words stuck in her throat. Finally, he spoke again, softer this time. "Your mother, she was brave, stronger than most. But there are things in this world, things she fought to protect you from, that are not finished. They are coming, Elara. And they will not wait for you to be ready." Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. She had felt alone in her grief, but now, standing beside this man, she realized the danger she had ignored. Her mother had died not just because of age or sickness. There had been something more, something dark that had always lingered at the edges of her family's life. Elara wanted to pull away, to retreat into the safety of her walls, but she found she could not. There was a raw, undeniable need for his strength, for the protection he offered, even if she did not fully understand it. They reached the gates of her family estate, the tall stone walls looming against the stormy sky. Kaelin paused, turning to her. "You will not be alone tonight," he said. His eyes softened, just slightly, showing a hint of the man beneath the legend of cruelty. "Not while I stand." Elara looked at him, her emotions a whirlwind of fear, gratitude, and something she could not name. Her mother had left her with a life of questions, of danger, and now, perhaps, with an unexpected protector. As he stepped back, a shadow flitted across the edge of the estate grounds. Elara's breath caught in her throat. She had felt it before, the sense that unseen eyes watched her. That danger was always closer than it seemed. But for the first time, she did not feel completely helpless. Kaelin's hand brushed against hers once more, a fleeting touch that sent a strange warmth through her despite the cold air. "Come inside," he said. "There is much you do not know, and the night is not safe." The moment was fragile, hanging between them like a thread about to snap. Elara wanted to ask questions, to demand answers about this mysterious man, about the danger her mother had warned her of. But as they stepped into the estate, the doors closing behind them, the wind carrying the sound of whispers from the graveyard, she felt something she had not felt since her mother's passing. A flicker of hope. But the hope was tempered by unease. Who was this man, really? Why had he come to her in her darkest hour? And most importantly, could she trust him? Or was she stepping into a storm far greater than she could imagine? Elara sank into the silence of the grand hall, the shadows of the room long and cold, and Kaelin stood by the window, watching the storm gather outside. The rain fell harder now, drumming against the stone walls, and the air seemed to hum with a presence she could not see. Then, almost imperceptibly, Kaelin whispered, his voice carrying across the room, low and certain, "They will not harm you again. Not while I am here." Elara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust the man who had appeared like a shadow from the storm itself. But a part of her knew that his presence, as comforting as it felt, came with its own danger. There was power in him, raw and unyielding, and power could be as cruel as grief itself. She shivered, pulling her cloak tighter around her shoulders. Outside, the wind howled, the rain lashed against the stone walls, and the storm seemed to echo the turmoil inside her heart. Alone, she had felt the crushing weight of sorrow. Now, with Kaelin nearby, she felt a new kind of tension, a mixture of fear, fascination, and longing. And somewhere deep inside, she wondered if this cruel alpha, this man of shadows and storms, was not just a protector, but the beginning of something she could neither name nor resist. The storm outside the estate raged like a restless beast, rain lashing against the high stone walls, and wind rattling the ancient windows. Inside, the halls were dark, lit only by flickering torches and the occasional flash of lightning. Lady Elara moved slowly through the grand corridors, her cloak trailing behind her, the echo of her footsteps mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Kalen walked beside her, silent, watching every shadow as if he could see threats lurking in the corners of the room. There was a tension in the air, thick and electric, that made her pulse quicken. She wanted to speak, to ask questions, but the weight of grief still pressed down on her shoulders. Instead, she let him guide her deeper into the heart of her family's estate. "This place, it feels empty," she said at last, her voice soft, almost a whisper. "Even with the storm, it feels waiting for something." Kalen's eyes flicked to her, gray and unreadable. "Empty, yes, but also dangerous. There are forces here, Elara, things your mother kept at bay, things that have waited for her death." Elara shivered. Her mother had always been secretive, careful, guarding certain truths. She had been told tales of curses and ancient magic, but she had never truly believed them. And yet, standing in the cold, silent hall with Kalen at her side, she could feel it, a presence, unseen but heavy, pressing against her skin like the brush of ghostly fingers. "Why are you here?" she asked finally, unable to hold the question back. "Why come to my mother's funeral, to me?" Kalen's gaze did not waver. He spoke slowly, choosing each word as if it carried weight beyond the moment. "Because you are not safe. Because the shadows that hunted your mother have not left. And because, in ways you do not understand, you are tied to them and to me." Elara frowned. "Tied to you?" "Yes," he said, his voice low, steady, carrying a hint of something she could not name: authority, warning, maybe even care. "The blood in your veins, the power you carry, it is part of a balance, something your mother worked to protect, something that others want to control." Her mind spun. She had always known her family was different, whispered about in the courts and markets, but she had never imagined that her mother's death would reveal such a dangerous world. She looked at Kalen, trying to read him, but his expression was carefully controlled, like a mask. They entered a room at the center of the estate, her mother's study. The door groaned as it opened, revealing shelves lined with old books, parchments stacked in neat towers, and objects that seemed to hum with a faint energy. A cold draft swept through the room, carrying the scent of old paper, candle wax, and something faintly metallic that made Elara's stomach twist. Kalen moved to a window, drawing aside the heavy curtains to peer into the storm. "This room holds the first pieces of the truth," he said. "Your mother studied the world beyond our own, the things humans fear to name. She left instructions, warnings, and protections. But some she kept hidden, even from you." Elara's eyes roamed the room. A small chest sat in the corner, carved with symbols she did not recognize. Scrolls were tied with crimson ribbons, their seals stamped with the emblem of her family. A serpent coiled around a moon. She felt drawn to them, a tug she could not resist. "Should I look?" she asked, her hand hovering over the chest. Kalen's gaze was sharp. "If you are ready," he said. "But know this. Some truths are heavy. They can change you, or destroy you." She swallowed hard, then knelt before the chest, lifting the lid. Inside lay a small, glowing amulet, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift when she looked at them. There were letters and notes in her mother's handwriting, describing rituals, ancient pacts, and a curse that had followed their bloodline for generations. Elara's hands trembled as she picked up the amulet. A pulse of warmth ran through her fingers, and for a moment, she felt a connection to her mother, a strength she had never known. Kalen watched silently, his eyes fixed on her face, unreadable. And yet, there was something in his expression, a hint of pride, of relief, maybe even something deeper. "The curse," Elara whispered. "All my life." My mother said, "It was just superstition." Kalen shook his head slowly. "It is real. And it is hungry. It has waited for her to pass, so it could come for you." Fear prickled at the edges of her mind. She wanted to retreat, to hide, to deny the words. But the amulet's pulse seemed to echo her own heartbeat. She could feel the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Kalen stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet steady. "I will not leave your side," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. "Not while the curse hunts you. Not while they threaten what your mother protected." Elara's chest tightened. She did not know how to respond. His words should have frightened her. But instead, they stirred something inside, a strange mix of fear, gratitude, and longing. For the first time since her mother's death, she allowed herself to hope. But it was a fragile hope, wrapped in the knowledge that danger was near, and that Kalen, for all his cruelty and power, was the only one who could guide her through it. They spent hours in the study, poring over letters, books, and artifacts. Kalen explained what he could, revealing a world of shadowed alliances, ancient pacts, and supernatural forces that operated just beyond the sight of ordinary people. Elara learned that her family's bloodline carried not just power, but a responsibility, a link to forces that could protect or destroy entire kingdoms. As night deepened and the storm outside raged louder, Elara felt both overwhelmed and alive. Every secret uncovered was a step into a larger, more dangerous world. She realized that her mother had not prepared her for death, she had prepared her for survival, for a destiny that required courage, cunning, and, sometimes, trust in those she would least expect. Kalen's presence remained constant, a shadow and anchor at once. Though he was stern, commanding, and at times unnerving, she felt a strange comfort in knowing he was there. Yet, she could not shake the questions that lingered in her mind. Why him? Why now? And beneath his controlled exterior, who was the man standing by her side? And what did he truly want? A sudden noise startled them, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper that came from the far corner of the room. Elara froze, her eyes darting toward the shadows. Kalen's hand moved instinctively to rest near the hilt of a hidden dagger at his belt. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice tight with tension. Kalen's gaze swept the room, sharp and calculating. "The house is old," he said finally, though his eyes did not leave the shadows. "It makes noises. But be ready. Not everything that moves in the dark is harmless." Elara's pulse quickened. The storm outside had become a muted roar, and the room seemed to shrink around her. She felt the weight of the amulet against her chest, a strange warmth that both comforted and warned her. She knew, deep down, that nothing would be safe tonight. Nothing, not her family estate, not the shadows, not even her own heart, would remain untouched by the truths she was only beginning to uncover. Kalen stepped closer, his presence looming, and for a moment, Elara felt the full force of his power. But there was also a flicker of something else, something human, almost tender. He did not touch her, yet she felt as if he were protecting her, guarding her against dangers she could not see. "You are stronger than you know," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "And the night will test you, but you are not alone." Elara wanted to believe him. She wanted to let herself lean on him, even just a little. And yet, a part of her knew that trust, like grief, was dangerous. To give it away too freely could mean losing herself entirely. The hours passed. The storm outside subsided into a steady rain, and the first pale light of dawn crept across the horizon. Elara felt exhausted, her mind swirling with secrets, warnings, and glimpses of power she did not yet fully understand. She sat alone in the study, the amulet warm against her chest, while Kaelin kept watch by the window, silent and vigilant. And as the first light touched the room, a shadow moved outside the window, not Kaelin's, not human. A subtle flicker of movement, a promise of danger waiting just beyond the estate walls. Ilara's heart thudded in her chest. She realized with a sinking certainty that her mother's death had been only the beginning. And Kaelin, the cruel alpha, who both frightened and fascinated her, would be the only one standing between her and the darkness that now circled closer than ever. The estate was quiet now, but not peaceful. Shadows lingered in every corner, curling along the walls like living things, and the air seemed to hum with a presence Ilara could feel, but not see. The amulet on her chest pulsed faintly, a heartbeat of light and warmth that mirrored her own. It was a warning, a guide, and a reminder of the legacy her mother had left behind. Ilara moved through the hallways, her cloak brushing the cold stone floors. Each step echoed, carrying with it the weight of her unease. She could feel eyes watching her from the darkness, from the very walls themselves. Her fingers traced the edge of the wooden railing as she climbed the grand staircase, heart pounding with a mix of fear and anticipation. Kaelin followed silently, his presence like a shadow that never left. His eyes scanned the room with precision, calculating every risk, every hidden danger. And yet, as he moved, there was a strange gentleness in the way he allowed her to lead, to explore, as if he knew the balance between guiding and controlling. "You feel it too," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, as they reached the upper floor. "The shadows. They have grown stronger since your mother's death. They are drawn to the bloodline, to the power you carry." Ilara nodded, unable to speak. The pulse of the amulet against her chest seemed louder now, a steady rhythm that reminded her of both the danger she faced and the strength she had inherited. They entered a smaller chamber, a library filled with scrolls, tomes, and objects that seemed to hum with latent magic. The walls were lined with mirrors, each reflecting not only their images but something darker, flickers of movement that didn't belong to either of them. Kaelin stopped beside her, his hand resting lightly on the hilt of his dagger. "You must learn quickly," he said. "The curse is clever. It watches, waits, and strikes when it senses weakness. Your grief makes you vulnerable. Your fear makes you a target." Ilara swallowed hard. She had spent days cloaked in mourning, consumed by sorrow and memory. But grief alone could not protect her. She needed strength, focus, and perhaps the courage to trust someone she had only just begun to understand. "Show me," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Teach me. I want to understand. And I want to survive." Kaelin's gray eyes softened, though only slightly. He had always been known for his cruelty, his unyielding nature. But in that moment, Ilara saw a glimpse of the man beneath the armor of legend. A protector forged by pain and loyalty. Someone who had known loss and carried it like a weapon. He nodded once, then drew a small, dark book from the shelf. Its cover was etched with symbols that seemed to writhe under the dim light. "This belonged to your mother," he said. "It holds the knowledge she used to guard the bloodline. Every spell, every ward, every protection. And some are dangerous if used without care." Ilara leaned closer, the flicker of torchlight illuminating her pale face. She could feel the power radiating from the book, the same subtle energy that thrummed from the amulet. As she opened it, a chill swept through the room, and the shadows in the mirrors seemed to twist and stretch, reaching toward her. "Focus," Kaelin said sharply. "The shadows will try to distract you. They feed on fear, doubt, and hesitation." Ilara took a deep breath, forcing her mind to clear. She read the first passage aloud, her voice trembling at first, but growing steadier with each word. The symbols glowed faintly, responding to her tone and intent. She felt the amulet warm against her chest, and a surge of energy coursed through her limbs. Kaelin watched silently, impressed despite himself. She was stronger than she realized, stronger than he had expected. And yet, he knew this was only the beginning. The curse was cunning, patient, and far from defeated. Hours passed as they practiced. Kaelin guided her, corrected her, challenged her. He pushed her limits, forcing her to confront her fears and test her control over the energy that pulsed through her veins. And with each lesson, with each careful movement and whispered instruction, Elara felt a bond, forming fragile, complicated, and powerful. It was not affection in the ordinary sense, nor was it simple trust. It was something more elemental, a connection forged in shared danger, grief, and the unspoken understanding that they were each other's anchor in a world that threatened to swallow them whole. As night deepened and the storm outside faded into a steady rain, Elara sensed movement in the shadows again. A figure, darker than the darkness itself, lingered near the far wall. She froze, fear gripping her heart. Kaelin's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, steadying her. "Do not panic," he said. "It tests you. It watches. But you are not alone." "We know." Elara nodded, summoning courage she had not known she possessed. She raised her hand, letting the power within her flow through the amulet, through the words she had practiced, and into the shadow before her. The figure recoiled, flickering, wavering as if the light of her determination burned it away. Kaelin's lips pressed into a thin line. "Good. But remember, this is only a taste of its strength. The curse is patient. It will return, and it will not be so forgiving." Her pulse raced, a mixture of adrenaline and awe. She had faced a fragment of the darkness and survived, guided by Kaelin's steady presence and her own growing power. But she knew the true test was still ahead, lurking in the unseen corners of the world, waiting for the moment of weakness to strike. For a brief moment, they stood in silence, the room filled only with the sound of rain tapping against the windows. And then, almost without warning, Kaelin moved closer. "Rest," he said softly, his hand brushing hers as he handed her a blanket. "Tomorrow, we continue. You need strength for what comes next." Elara looked up at him, heart thundering. His presence was overwhelming, yet comforting. She wanted to speak, to ask him questions, to understand him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she let herself lean into the warmth of the blanket, into the safety of his shadow. For a moment, the storm outside and the shadows within seemed distant, and she allowed herself a fragile sense of peace. Yet even as she closed her eyes, a part of her mind remained alert, attuned to the faintest flicker of movement in the dark corners of the room. Then, without warning, a soft, chilling laugh echoed through the hall. Elara's eyes snapped open. The mirrors along the walls shimmered, reflecting something that was not there, before a shape, tall and thin, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. Kaelin's hand moved to the dagger at his belt, his body tense, ready for the threat. "It has found us," he said, his voice low and sharp. "And it knows we are together." Elara's chest tightened. The shadows were no longer distant or abstract. They were here, in the room with them, testing, watching, threatening. And yet, she did not feel completely helpless. The power within her, the knowledge of her mother's protection, and the presence of Kaelin gave her courage. She rose to her feet, holding the amulet tightly, letting its warmth spread through her. The figure in the shadows flickered, shifting and twisting, as if unsure how to proceed against her newfound strength. Kaelin stepped beside her, his gaze never leaving the darkness. "Together," he said simply. "No matter what comes, we face it together." Elara nodded, a surge of determination rising within her. For the first time since her mother's funeral, she felt not only fear but also power, control, and the bond of trust with the man who had appeared in the storm, cruel, mysterious, and impossibly strong. The shadow hesitated, then vanished into the corners of the room, leaving only a lingering chill and the faintest echo of a whisper. Elara's hands shook slightly, but she did not falter. She had faced the darkness and, with Kaelin by her side, she had survived. And yet, even as she allowed herself a moment of pride, she knew the night was far from over. The curse was clever, patient, and it would return. The shadows would come again, and the trials ahead would test not only her strength, but her heart. For now, though, she had learned something vital. She was not alone. The morning light barely touched the estate as Elara stood at the highest tower, the amulet warm against her chest, pulsing like a heartbeat in sync with her own. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving a gray mist that clung to the earth. Yet the air was heavy with anticipation, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Kaelin stood beside her, silent, his eyes scanning the horizon. The cruel alpha who had haunted her thoughts, frightened and fascinated her in equal measure, now seemed like a guardian carved from shadow and steel. He did not speak, but the tension in his stance spoke volumes. They were on the edge of something greater than either of them had faced. Elara felt a mixture of fear and determination. The shadows had grown stronger each night, testing her, pushing her to the limits of her courage. She had learned to channel her mother's wisdom, to wield the power she carried in her bloodline. But she knew the final trial would be the greatest. The whispers she had heard in the corridors, the flickers of movement in the mirrors, all pointed to one unavoidable truth. The curse was coming. Fully. Now. Kaelin finally spoke, his voice low and commanding. "It is here, Elara. The curse, the shadow, the force that has haunted your family for generations. It will not leave without a battle. Are you ready?" Elara's fingers tightened around the amulet. She had been ready, she realized, not because she felt no fear, but because she understood what must be done. "I am," she said quietly, "and I will face it, not alone, but with you." He gave a brief, approving nod. There was a flicker in his eyes, a softness, a glimmer of the man beneath the mask of cruelty. And for a moment, she saw the weight he carried, the sacrifices he had made, and the loyalty he felt toward her and her family. The first sign of the curse's arrival was subtle, a shift in the air, a cold that seeped through the stone walls, carrying with it whispers of anger and malice. Then, a shadow formed in the center of the courtyard, dark and solid, yet moving like smoke in the wind. Its form twisted, a mass of shapes that seemed alive, writhing and shifting as it drew closer. Elara and Kaelin descended to the main hall, the amulet glowing brightly against her chest. She could feel the pulse of power responding to the darkness, like a counterbalance. A tether between them and the malevolent force approaching. Kaelin drew a dagger from his belt, its blade etched with runes that shimmered faintly. "The curse is clever," he said. "It will try to strike fear, to make you doubt yourself, to divide us. Stay focused. Trust your strength, and trust me." Elara nodded, her heart pounding. She could feel the energy of her bloodline rising within her, fueled by grief, determination, and the desire to honor her mother's legacy. The shadows writhed and advanced, their whispers rising into a low, chilling roar. As the first tendrils of darkness reached for them, Kaelin stepped forward, placing himself between Elara and the shadow. "Now," he commanded. Elara lifted her hands, letting the amulet guide her. Words from her mother's texts flowed into her mind, forming shapes, symbols, and light. The energy radiated from her, filling the courtyard with a warmth that pushed against the cold darkness. The shadow recoiled, hissing and twisting, but it did not retreat entirely. It was testing her, probing for weakness. Kalen moved beside her, his dagger slicing through the shadows as if cutting smoke. He was ruthless, precise, yet protective, allowing her to channel her power fully while keeping the darkness at bay. The bond between them, forged through grief, trust, and tension, became their strength. "You can do this," Kalen said, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "You were made for this, Alara. Your mother's power flows through you. Remember, you are not alone." Ilara's chest swelled with determination. She felt the warmth of the amulet spread through her arms, her legs, her entire being. With each pulse, the shadows shrank slightly, their malevolent whispers growing desperate. She channeled every lesson Kalen had taught her, every moment of grief and fear, every spark of courage she had found in herself. Then, a voice echoed through the courtyard, not Kalen's, not hers, but something older, angrier, more ancient. The curse had a voice, a deep, chilling sound that vibrated in the air. "Child of the bloodline, you cannot escape me," it hissed. Alara did not falter. She stepped forward, her power flaring around her, a shield of light and warmth that pushed against the darkness. "I am not afraid," she shouted. "I carry the strength of my mother, and I will not let you harm me or my family." The shadow writhed violently, forming sharp, jagged shapes that struck at her. Kalen intercepted them, slashing with his dagger, protecting her while she unleashed her energy. Together, they were a force that the curse had not anticipated, the union of ruthless strength and inherited power. Mind and heart, in perfect balance. The battle raged, the courtyard a storm of shadow and light, of steel and magic. Alara felt exhaustion tug at her limbs, but she would not stop. Kalen's presence, his steady hand, and the rhythm of their combined power fueled her resolve. Then, with a final surge, Alara lifted the amulet high. Its light pulsed once, twice, and then expanded outward in a wave that engulfed the shadow completely. The darkness shrieked, twisting and thrashing, before it finally dissipated, leaving only faint wisps that quickly vanished into the mist. Alara sank to her knees, her chest heaving, the warmth of the amulet still strong against her heart. She had done it. The curse had been confronted, faced, and for now, banished. Kalen knelt beside her, his hand brushing gently against her hair, tucking a strand behind her ear. "You were magnificent," he said softly, "stronger than even I knew. You carried your mother's legacy, and your own power, and you triumphed." Tears pricked at Alara's eyes, not from fear, but from relief, gratitude, and a deep, unspoken bond that had formed between them. She looked up at him, searching his expression, seeing not cruelty or legend, but the man who had walked beside her through darkness and fear, who had challenged her, guided her, and protected her. "You were cruel to me once," she whispered, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "And yet, you saved me." Kalen's lips curved into the faintest smile, almost unnoticeable, but enough to soften the harsh lines of his face. "I am not cruel to those I protect," he said quietly. "I am relentless to the world, but I am yours, Alara. When it matters most, I stand with you." The wind outside stirred, carrying away the last remnants of the storm. The courtyard was quiet, the shadows gone, and the first rays of dawn filtered through the mist, illuminating the glistening stones. Alara felt a peace she had not known since her mother's death, fragile, yes, but real. They stood together in silence, the bond between them stronger than any curse, any shadow, any danger. They had faced fear, grief, and darkness, and emerged not only alive, but changed. Transformed by the trial and the connection forged in it. Kalen's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, holding her with a strength that was both protective and tender. The curse is broken, he said, his voice low and certain. But the world is still dangerous, and there will be other trials. Together, we will face them all. Ilara nodded, feeling the warmth of his hand, the pulse of the amulet, and the strength she now carried within herself. She had been alone, sitting in grief, consumed by sorrow at her mother's funeral. And now, she had found not only power, but also trust, companionship, and a bond that transcended fear. For the first time, she allowed herself to hope not just for survival, but for life, for connection, for the possibility that even in a world of shadows, cruelty, and ancient curses, light could exist. And sometimes, that light came in the form of someone who had seemed cruel, yet stood unwavering beside her. As they looked out across the misty landscape, Kalen whispered softly, almost to himself, "You were never alone, Ilara." Not once. Ilara's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "And I never will be again." Yet even in that moment of peace, a faint stirring in the distance reminded them both that the world was vast, and not all darkness had been banished. The curse was broken, yes, but the whispers of shadow lingered, distant and patient. They would face it if it returned together. For now, though, they stood united, bound by grief, courage, and an unexpected trust that had grown into something deeper than either had anticipated. A cruel alpha and a grieving daughter of a noble line, survivors of darkness, protectors of legacies, and perhaps, in time, something more.